so many of you have asked about things like peptides. If you don't know what that is, you're gonna have to watch the episode. What about these remedies like ayahuasca and all these crazy plant-based medicines? What about microdosing? Many of you have asked those questions, and I really didn't want to bring on an expert in those areas that they think that is just the only way. Well, my good friend, Ben Greenfield, brings a balanced answer to those questions that many of you had. But beyond that, we talk about his book, Boundless. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica of fitness, recovery, anti-aging, biohacking. He is the king of biohacks. You'll hear our conversation as Ben walks up a mountain and about some of these topics that will bring some light. Get your pen ready because he throws it at you. But Ashley's done a great job of capturing these resources, so don't panic. But I'm telling you, the wealth of knowledge in these areas. Wait till you hear the interview.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cellular Healing TV. I'm Ashley Smith, and today we welcome human performance consultant, speaker, and New York Times bestselling author, and great friend of the show, Ben Greenfield. He's here today to discuss his epic new book called Boundless, which focuses on upgrading the brain, optimizing the body, and defying aging. You'll hear all about everything you need to know about biohacking one's life. So let's get started and welcome Ben Greenfield and, of course, Dr. Pompa to the show. Welcome, both of you.
All right.
Yo, yo.
Yeah, well, when we have Ben on, you said it, Ashley, like you just never know what to expect, right? He's always doing something, whether it's a treadmill, some type of biohack. Today he's outside. I don't blame him. So
I need to find some kind of like a chest-mounted selfie stick at some point. I'm kind of a Luddite. Somebody tried to teach me how to use one of these gimbals. It kind of keeps the phone stable while you're walking around. I got to wrap my head around that at some point.
I used one too, and mine got caught stuck upside down, right? So I was like, screw it. I'll just go back to the
Yeah, well, there's a couple of studies coming out showing how beneficial nitric oxide is for its antiviral effect against SARS-like viruses. So I figure, sunlight, some heat, some hyperbaric, some intermittent hypoxic training, some cold. Anything you can do to amplify nitric oxide, I'll take this time of year.
Well, it's funny, Ben and I, we have downtime and we biohack ourselves, and both of our homes look very similar, and we're good friends. So we've been in each other's homes. Matter of fact, I stayed in Ben's home and he wasn't even there. He was out traveling, and I wanted to stay there just so I could do the same biohacks I do in my own home. And when Ben comes to Park City, you stay in my home to biohack. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's very, very few places you can go where you roll in and you can shoot some ozone up your backside and slip into a hyperbaric for a little while, strip off your clothes and hit some red light and do all other manner of tomfoolery before pulling out a blender and throwing 20 superfoods in and making yourself a smoothie. And I think your house, Dan, and my house are two such spots where you can do it without buying membership at a health clinic.
Yeah, exactly. So we take advantage of that, which brings us to the topic today. Your new book, man. Here it is, folks. Boundless.
Oh yeah,
I love it. It's more like an Encyclopedia Britannica. I mean, it has everything in it. I call you the king of biohacks because some people may argue with me, okay, but what's this person? It's that person. Like, I'm all about biohacks, but I'm going to be honest with you, man. You put me to shame. And so therefore you were the one to write the book, not me. But although I practice most of these things, but I earmarked some of the places in the book that I want you to expand upon, right?
Okay.
Because again, that way people know it's in the book. So, there's no possible way we can bring light to all of it. But I tell you what, let's start with the brain, because you gave a lot. I mean, this is a big book and it has all the biohacks and all of your favorite things. But I was surprised at how much you put on the brain. But I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I was very happy with it. But, the brain boosting stacks that you do, you go everywhere from, foods, you go everywhere from supplements. And one area that I've never talked about on the show that I want you to focus on right now, and you can scrape on the other ones if you want, but microdosing psychedelics, microdosing things, and because there's a legitimate side to that. And I've been asked the question before, and you know what my answer is? I'm no expert here. And maybe you would say the same, but you've done a lot of it, and there's some benefit to it. But start with just nootropics. What do we mean by nootropics, and how do we improve our brain? Let's start there.
You bastard! You would go straight to the drugs.
There's other ideas. Nootropics don't have to be drugs, right? So.
Yeah. Let me lay down the caveat that I am a total foodie. We live very naturally out here in Spokane. We got goats, we got chickens. I hunt most of our meat. I get salmon from friends who fish or go through companies like, U.S. Wellness Meats or Belcampo or Vital Choice. I've right now been doing a lot of seed sprouting of alfalfa and red clover and broccoli. So I'm growing these wonderful sprouts, which, by the way, if you put them in a food dehydrator with a little sea salt, best snack ever. And sprouts are just super nutrient dense. I'm making a lot of yogurt ferments right now out of goat milk and coconut yogurt, which I break different bacterial probiotics into, because from a budget standpoint, you can make probiotics go the distance, because when you ferment them, you literally 10 times the number of active bacteria in them. And also because they're part of a food bolus passing through the gut, they're going to do a better job painting the gut with the bacteria rather than capsules, which, if they survive the acidic nature of the stomach, are going to kind of just sprinkle your gut with bacteria. And to a lot of these yogurts and ferments, I'll add a little acacia fiber or a good prebiotic fiber, so that at the same time, those probiotics have a really good food medium. And my wife also and my kids do a ton of wonderful cooking. So we eat a very whole foods diet. We don't do a lot of packaged foods.
No.
I also, the reason I'm saying this is I don't want people to think that I look at supplements as a replacement for a really good whole foods based diet, including very, very nutrient dense things like nature's multivitamin, right? Like organ meat, bone broth.
In defense, your book starts with those things, then it goes into the supplements, and then it goes into this microdosing concept. And I have to say, it's the only reason people have asked me about it, and I never brought anyone on the show.
Oh, yeah.
I don't trust anyone else. You have to understand, Ben is not into this, but yet he's explored it because there is, some validity around it. Yeah. But again, I'm not going to bring someone on the show that's going to be all about this and like thinking this is the answer, right? Ben's going to have a really balanced approach. So I wanted someone to talk about it, and I trust you to talk about it. But you're right. You start with the food, then you go into some supplements. So talk about some of the supplements that are your favorite as well for the brain. And this applies to, first of all, back up the word nootropic, right? This is a new word for some people, meaning it's kind of, explain that word because you use it in your book.
Yeah, I'll get there. Caveat number one, whole foods. Start there. Caveat number two is whenever we're talking about either nootropics or smart drugs, although nootropics, to answer your question, are typically natural derivatives harvested from plants that mimic something that the body already creates, or that are not a synthetically created lab-based compound, they and smart drugs both do have great potential for example, flooding the synaptic cleft with serotonin, resulting to some amount of serotonin insensitivity, causing a dopamine surge that might eventually lead to dopamine insensitivities and some of the appetite dysregulation or food cravings, et cetera, that can accompany that. Others can relate or can cause things like a buildup of gamma aminobutyric acid, the inhibitory neurotransmitter intolerance or insensitivity. And so what I mean by that is, you can certainly do as much damage from a serotonin standpoint with excess use of something like St. John's wort or holy basil as you can with something like Provigil, right? Like modafinil or Adderall, or even a sleep drug like a Valium or a diazepam derivative. So that's kind of caveat number two, is although nootropics are by definition, to answer your question, Dan, a little bit more natural, you still need to proceed with caution when I'm talking about these things. And, more is definitely not better. And you also want to pay attention to selectively using these type of compounds only when the time requires. Now, that being said, there are a select few nootropics that I found to be particularly effective, and I can tell you what those are, and then I can also get into this concept of also using some of these so-called psychedelics in more of a microdosing format to enhance cognitive function. From a nootropic standpoint, I would say that a few choice compounds or stacks that I think are particularly effective. One is this idea that we know that certain compounds, when they interact with photons of light, such as these red light therapy devices that I know that you use, Dan, such as the Juve light, or head-worn devices like a V-light, or of course sunlight, they actually can kick off electrons, even in the absence of calories, in the absence of digesting food, that can produce energy and allow for the mitochondrial production of ATP via a direct production of electrons that can be used in the electron transport chain. Now, a few of those that interact with photons of light to give you that physical and cognitive pick-me-up would be anything that contains melanin. There's a wonderful book called Human Photosynthesis. It was translated, I believe, from Russian, that goes into how humans can photosynthesize very similarly to plants, using some molecules that we have built into our bodies, melanin being one of the most notable. And compounds that are rich in melanin, that there's not a whole lot of them besides what you already have in your skin, but anything that's kind of like dark black or brown in color usually has some melanin content. And chaga mushroom is one of those.
Yeah.
So chaga mushroom in combination with sunlight or photobiomodulation is amazing. And then there are a couple of others that act similarly. Anything that has higher levels of chlorophyll in it, like chlorella or marine phytoplankton, and you could also stack this with chaga in response to red light or sunlight, can produce a similar effect. And then there's also one that I would consider to be slightly more synthetic, but interestingly, in these times, because we're recording this during the coronavirus issue, has also been shown to amplify nitric oxide, specifically in combination with nicotine, to the extent where you might get some significant antiviral activity as well. Something commonly sold in the past as a fish tank cleaner, but if you buy a pharmaceutical grade online, it's called methylene blue.
Yeah.
Methylene blue. And methylene blue by itself, especially if you're out in the sunlight or under one of these red light panels, is a fantastic nootropic. And it's even more enhanced if you combine it with pharmaceutical grade nicotine. Nicotine can also be helpful for the mitochondria as well as nitric oxide production. The trick is getting pharmaceutical grade and also not overdoing it, because in a manner very similar to some of these photobiomodulation panels people are using, like a Juve device, for example, or a head-worn device like that V-light I mentioned, or even like a sauna that has infrared panels built into it. We know that excess use of some of these devices can create excess reactive oxygen species. Mm-hmm. So you actually want to be careful with your dosage of something like methylene blue. I did a lot of research on it before I started using it, and the sweet spot appears to be about 100 micrograms. And I give some pretty precise dosage recommendations in the book for like measuring and dosing, but essentially what it comes out to is, let's say you get a bottle of pharmaceutical grade nicotine extract, and then you get a bottle of pharmaceutical grade methylene blue from a company like Blue Brain Boost, for example. All you do is you take, both of those are going to come in a dropper bottle, and one dropper full, it's a 1 ml dropper. So all you do is you take 5 of those droppers of nicotine and get rid of them. You take them out of the bottle, put them in a different bottle, save it for later, or et cetera. Then you take 5 dropperfuls of methylene blue and you put that into the bottle instead. And if you do that and you mix them together, when you take 10 drops of that, it's going to equate to 100 micrograms of methylene blue. And that's like your sweet spot dosage. And it will also equate to about 1 milligram of nicotine, which is kind of a sweet spot dosage for a microdose of nicotine. So those would be 3: methylene blue, anything with chlorophyll in it, or any chaga extract in combination with sunlight or red light. Those are some really fantastic nootropics that kind of fly under the radar obviously there are a lot of done for you blends like Siltep or Qualia Mind or Alpha Brain, but those are a few that I found to be particularly helpful. There are also, if we look at this from a synthetic standpoint, and we look at the field of peptides, these amino acid sequences that can target specific cell receptors for shutting down brain inflammation or improving the integrity of the blood-brain barrier, something I address in pretty good detail in chapter 2 of the book. There's a topical peptide. If you go to the website for the International Peptide Society, you can find a doctor who can prescribe this for you. Dihexa is a topical peptide, and in combination with an intranasal peptide called CMAX, that 1-2 combo gives you pretty much everything that something like modafinil would give you without a lot of the neurotransmitter imbalancing side effects. So that'd be considered slightly more synthetic because those peptide sequences aren't made naturally by the body, and those are made by amino acid sequencing machines in a laboratory. But that's also a pretty good stack. If I could give you one more before I talk a little bit about something like psychedelic. Go ahead.
Folks listening, Ashley will put together what he's saying into you and add some links to some of these things that Ben is talking about. So fear not. And also, it's in his book. So make sure you get Boundless. And Ashley will also put the link. And of course, you can find it on Amazon. We'll link it here, right here. So you can get the book, because it is all in the book. Okay, what's the third one, Ben? And by the way, we're talking about how to make your brain perform better. Is brain fog and just not remembering things is the #1 symptom people complain about. This is how you optimize your brain health. So, okay, what's the third stack, Ben?
Yeah, I'd say the third, not necessarily a stack, although if you combine this with any sirtuin precursor, it would be very helpful for DNA repair, particularly if you're exposed to a lot of non-native EMF. And a sirtuin precursor would be something like resveratrol or pterosilbene, cacao extract, even like blueberry powder, coffee berry fruit extract. There's a lot of different sirtuin precursors out there, but it would be figuring out a way to actually increase the levels of NAD, particularly in neural tissue. We know that levels of NAD will drop off by up to 90% as you approach the age of 70. We know that it is particularly effective for enhancing the health of the mitochondria and also the health of the DNA if you have your sirtuin levels topped off as well. But a lot of these NAD supplements, they don't actually wind up in the hypothalamus. They don't actually wind up in the brain. So if you want something that will actually work in the brain, it turns out that of all the different forms of NAD out there, if you can use sublingual, meaning like it's going to dissolve in your mouth, NMN, or intranasal, NAD, you can actually specifically increase NAD in neural tissue, and that's it's less of a cognitive pick-me-up that you would get from that. It's more of a generalized brain anti-inflammatory effect. So this would be something you'd use for something like jet lag. Maybe you've had a dinner party and a few extra glasses of wine the night before. Maybe you're low on sleep, which is going to contribute to brain inflammation. But intranasal NAD via an NAD spray or a sublingual NMN tablet
and
to increase NAD
do you have
levels.
Sources for that in the book, those sources?
Yeah, and one company that's doing a pretty good job with those two right now is, and I'm not financially affiliated or anything, it's Alive by Nature. They do a pretty good sublingual NMN and intranasal NAD spray, which incidentally they compound that with CBD, which has a little bit of an anti-inflammatory effect as well. So that's another kind of cool little stack that you could use if you know that your brain has been subjected to some amount of inflammation, such as, again, jet lag, alcohol, loss of sleep, etc. So those are a few in terms of the kind of the non-psychedelic-ish type of sources that I like. We could also get into, with psychedelics. See, one of the problems with psychedelics, well, there's a few problems. If you look at this, both you and I, Dan, we're Christians, and a lot of psychedelics these days are administered under the supervision of a facilitator. And a lot of times there's a pretty strong kind of like secular, or even what I would consider to be, and hopefully I don't scare too many people away with it, almost like a demonic type of approach that's very, very, very focused on, we are God, there is no God but us, universal human consciousness, etc. And I think you need to be really careful with the world of psychedelics. I'm not a fan of things like, for example, inhaling DMT or going on like ayahuasca trips to South America under the supervision of a shaman down there, in the absence of a more kind of Christian approach. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of these mind-altering compounds taken in high doses, because I feel that they can actually take you away from God. And I think that everything that we need really for a lot of that is already found in the Bible. It's already found in Scripture. We can get most of the wisdom that we need from that. Do I use plant medicine in high doses? I have. I will occasionally do that, specifically with my wife, as a way to just kind of dissolve our egos. And and under couples therapy, I actually do it with a Christian couple who kind of supervises the whole thing. And there's not any type of demonic component to it. You're just basically kind of tweaking serotonin and dopamine levels a little bit to have a deeper connection with your partner, not to go on some deep, potentially I think demonic journey if you're not careful, because the spirit world, especially if you're immersed in that, which plant medicine immerses you in, and you're yoked to a secular approach to it, I think it can be very dangerous, just speaking from a Christian perspective. However, in smaller doses, just like alcohol, right? Like, we know that getting drunk is an irresponsible use of our human temple. It also takes us away from being able to do things like, make a defense for the hope of the gospel that is within us, or, be able to take care of our families if we're constantly tweaking our brains with excess amounts of alcohol. But we know that microdoses of alcohol are actually fantastic for you. We know from the blue zones, that the consumption of like a glass or two of biodynamic organic wine in the evening, or some of these really bitters forward cocktails, with things like, lemon juice and apple cider vinegar and bitters, maybe a little bit of gin, a little bit of vodka. We know there's even a hormetic response to microdoses of ethanol. And so, I'm not one of those guys who says alcohol is wrong, but I think that anything in excess can be irresponsible. And so when you look at some of these plant-based compounds, I have the same approach. I think God put everything on his planet for the use of a good purpose. It's just how you use it and in what setting. Yeah. So a few such compounds, the plant-based fungus ergo would have been the original derivative of this. Now it's synthetically produced, but there are a few different forms of LSD, two in particular called PLSD, and another one called LSA, that when taken in very small doses, like about 10 to 20 micrograms, can actually cause a merging of the left and right hemispheric activity of the brain and a huge amount of combined focus, productivity, and creativity. That's fantastic for, in my opinion, powering through a day of like brainstorming, creation, writing, mapping out a project or a book, etc. And so a small microdose of LSD, or in particular PLSD or LSA, that's one example of a psychedelic that I found to be pretty effective for microdosing. So we're talking about like one tenth of the dose you'd use for something like a trip. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to define. What is a microdose? It's so fractional that you feel normal, except it kicks on your creative mind, to your point, and a different part of your brain. Yeah. And again, people have asked me about these things, and and they're saying, they're reading about them, they're hearing about them on social media, some aspect, and I've never done a show about it, Ben. So I was, I knew you'd bring a balanced response to it.
Yeah, there's a couple others that folks might find useful. Paul Stamets, local guy up who lives around me, he's a wonderful mushroom harvester and fungal researcher. He came up with a really, really nice stack that's been made popular, and I actually think works quite well. And that would be, you take lion's mane, which, when we talk about the doctrine of signatures in nature, right? Like walnuts are good for your brain because they look like a little brain, or pomegranates or tomatoes, when you cut those open, they kind of look like the atria and the ventricles of the heart, and they're good for cardiovascular function, or avocados for your testicles, fellas. Like there's a lot of cool examples in nature like that. And when you look at lion's mane in nature, it actually looks like a cluster of axons and dendrites. It's really an interesting looking mushroom. And that can be powdered and extracted, preferably with a dual extract of alcohol and water. So you're getting all the active components of lion's mane. And there are companies that do that, like Paul Stamets' company. I forget the name of his company, but Real Mushrooms is another company out of Canada. Has a good lion's mane. Four Sigmatic does a good job with their lion's mane. And you can take this lion's mane, which is actually, it's a decent nootropic in and of itself. And even you could even use that in a cup of coffee. But I think even better is you combine it with anything that's going to cause a little bit of vasodilation, right? So beetroot powder, niacin, any nitric oxide precursor, even something like nitroglycerin cream. Nitroglycerin cream, by the way, I always have a bottle of that around because we're all adults here, so we can talk about this. But if you have a little bit of nitroglycerin cream and you apply some of that scrotally, it's like insta Viagra. And I actually will use that sometimes before sex, and then I'll give it to my wife. And that nitroglycerin cream on the clitoris is just an amazing, like, screaming orgasm for her. But it's also useful if you combine it and you apply it on either side of the neck with any of these nootropics to enhance the blood flow to the brain. And in particular, anything like that's going to increase nitric oxide production is going to help out with this stack that I'm describing. And the traditional stack that Paul Stamets recommends, and I give the exact dosages in the book, uses niacin. Okay, so you've got lion's mane, you've got niacin, and the third component is psilocybin. Okay, so psilocybin extract, just to give you some dosages here, most people will begin to feel the effects of a trip-like dosage somewhere around 2 grams to 6 grams, around in there. We're talking about taking about 0.1 to 0.2 grams. So again, a very small dose. And you combine that with lion's mane. And for me personally, I use 2 packets of the 4 Sigmatic lion's mane and a little bit of niacin. And you combine those 3 together in some coffee or some tea, or you can just dump them straight into your mouth. And man, that is an amazing stack. In particular for more of like a social day. Like that's something you would use before, like, let's say you're going to a big conference, Dan, you just want to be on your feet, chatting with people all day, really sociable, really in touch with people's emotions, very connected. It's very good for that. It's wonderful for things like hikes or hunting or anything where you want increased sensory perception. It's good for just like whatever, a day at Disneyland with the kids where you just want to turn on all your senses and all the colors and lights and vibrancy. So that's kind of a cool stack. Well, lion's mane, niacin or any nitric oxide precursor, and psilocybin. And kind of like the other example, if I could give you three, I would say that a third example that's more of a psychedelic example would be ketamine. Now, ketamine is commonly used in higher doses as an antidepressant.
Talk about that in your book. You know, how do you microdose ketamine for different reasons?
Yep.
So
yeah, and as an addiction treatment, but in small doses. There's a couple of ways that I like to use it. First of all, it's very relaxing. In higher doses, it kind of turns your muscles into complete jello, so you need to be careful. But it's very, very relaxing in smaller doses. So this would be like pre-bed at the end of a very long day. It's also wonderful for sex because it just kind of relaxes your whole body, and I find it kind of increases connectivity with your partner. And really, my favorite way to use ketamine, to be honest with you, is for massage sessions. Like if you're going to get some deep tissue work or a sports tissue massage, and you just want that person to be able to like dig their elbows into your IT band and work real deep into the rotator cuff and all these areas where you normally really contract and guard, I do a little bit of intranasal ketamine before deep tissue work or before a massage. And I mean, my therapist can just dig into anywhere and I barely feel it, which kind of makes sense because it's also used as almost like an anesthetic drug, administered via IV for like medical procedures.
I have
but
a whole story.
Intranasal ketamine is interesting.
I have a whole story of my son Simon when they did a procedure in the hospital. They gave him ketamine. I should really attach it here. It's absolutely hilarious. It acts as a truth serum. I'll tell you that too. So anyway, a little too relaxed.
Oh, really?
A little too relaxed. Yeah.
I guess Yeah, I've taken higher doses of I've done an intravenous infusion of ketamine before just to see what it was like, even without a medical procedure. Actually, I did that with Dr. Matt Cook down in San Jose. He just wanted to kind of have me experience what ketamine was like, and that you full on. I would consider that kind of similar to something like ayahuasca or DMT, like you full on trip with it. And I don't necessarily think that unless you've got some really good facilitation going on, I think you got to be careful with the higher doses. But microdosing with ketamine, I think for sex or deep tissue work or a little bit of relaxation at the end of the day, that's another one that I found some benefit from. So those are some examples of just a few of the psychedelics and the microdosing of psychedelics that I discussed in the book.
Exactly. And I think you brought balance to it. And again, everyone asked me about it, and frankly, I've never done it. And I know that you have put a lot of research in that, and you discussed it in the book, which is really cool, So, these are, look, Ben has put more time into, researching these biohacks for the brain, honestly, than anyone I know. So great resource in Boundless. Let's shift gears. To, I think this is what you're known for, is I'm in my space, the king of detox. You are the king, in your space of, recovery, but everything fitness related, man, you are the guy. So let's talk about something that applies even to my audience, recovery, because recovery, if you're an athlete, that's basically how you heal, how you benefit. And that applies to people who are sick as well. So first of all, let me ask you this. You talk a lot about recovery in here. What are your favorite? And this is, again, we could pull this into nutrition, supplements, and biohacks. So maybe you give one of each, right? This is a broad topic, man, but you're the king of recovery, which is really the match.
Okay. So nutrition, supplements, and biohacks. Okay, here we go. Nutrition. Huge fan of adding ascorbic acid or vitamin C, or even in a pinch, like the squeeze of just fresh lemon into bone broth. And multiple research studies have shown that the collagen properties of bone broth, the joint healing properties of bone broth, are amplified with the addition of vitamin C. So from a whole food standpoint, because I usually have about 2 cups of bone broth a day, and at least one of those I always consume with ascorbic acid or a good vitamin C capsule or the squeeze of a lemon. And adding vitamin C to your bone broth can really kind of upgrade your bone broth from a joint healing and a recovery standpoint.
I know your wife, Jessa, she's making bone broth all the time, naturally from actual bones, I'm sure. But what is your favorite actual, do you have a product that if people don't have time to make bone broth every day? Do you have a product you love?
Well, I'd say Kettle and Fire, but I want to be totally honest. I invested in Kettle and Fire, and I invested in them because I really liked what they were doing, but just all cards on the table. I'm an investor in Kettle and Fire, but I absolutely love what they're doing. Like, they do the slow 24-hour simmer. It's full organic. There's no metals in it. Epic does a pretty good job with their bone broth as well. And then there's a company out of LA. I actually get some meat from this company. Like US Wellness Meats, I get a lot of meat from. And then this other company, I've got a whole freezer full of beef tongue, beef liver, sweet breads, and I actually had some really nice 14-day dry age ribeyes from this company last night. Bel Campo down in LA. They have a wonderful regenerative farm in Northern California, and their bone broth is really amazing too. So I like Bel Campo. I like Epic. I like Kettle and Fire. And I think the last one that I found, I think it's called Bonafide Provisions, like BONAFIDE.
I like that.
Yeah. So those are a few bone broths that I'm a fan of. And again, you want to be careful because some bone broths do have some amount of metals in them.
Yeah.
So be careful with bone broth. But yeah, and then just add vitamin C to it. You can go pretty high. You can go to bowel tolerance. I mean, if you can tolerate 10 grams of vitamin C without, painting the back of the toilet seat, go for it. But for me, sweet spot's around like 4 to 6 grams vitamin C with the bone broth. So that'd be a nutrition tactic. From a supplementation standpoint, man, on an empty stomach, because on a full stomach, these are going to digest the proteins from food. But on an empty stomach, they actually will work on fibrinogen in your bloodstream, which can actually contribute to everything from clotting to inflammation to joint pain. And that would be any type of supplement that contains proteolytic enzymes, like trypsin or chymotrypsin or papain or bromelain. These are absolutely fantastic for recovery. So I take 3 capsules of a good proteolytic enzyme on an empty stomach before bed at night. And you know, the cool thing is, because I like I mentioned, I do a lot of cooking, and the cool thing is, if you have like a really good proteolytic enzyme supplement, you can actually, if you're marinating meat, you can take about 3 or 4 of those capsules and break them open into your meat marinade, and it does a fantastic job tenderizing the meat. So you can add this to a marinade as well if you have some of those enzymes on hand. But in the same way it tenderizes meat, tenderizes you. So that's a wonderful recovery supplement, just like before bed on an empty stomach on any day where you're injured or you've had a really hard workout. Big fan of proteolytic
and I'll tell
enzymes.
you, they work great for just people that are inflamed, have pain, right? They work great for atherosclerosis, cleaning out arteries, right? But like I said, that's why I love this topic. Anything that's going to help you recover faster is going to be good for the average person who, doesn't feel well. So this is great stuff.
Yeah, they may also have an impact on biofilm as well, which is kind of cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then so from a biohacking standpoint, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I'm trying to think of something that's not gonna, cost people like $8,000, like a hyperbaric chamber or, like a red light therapy or something like that.
We love Pulse. We love those things, but they're higher price tickets. So what the average person, what can they do?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably at the top of the totem pole for me, because it could be free or it could be expensive as you want to make it, would be the concept, of course, made popular in Clint Ober's book, Earthing. And that would be earthing or grounding. The use of either like earthing and grounding mats underneath your top sheet on your bed, or that you stand on when you're working at your desk, or even the use of pulsed electromagnetic field therapy mats, which do a very similar thing as earthing or grounding does, but kind of concentrate the frequency at a higher dosage, like any of Dr. William Pollack's products, like the BioBalance mat, for example, or the Pulse Center's PMF table, or even like a smaller portable unit, like a Flex Pulse or an Earth Pulse, grounding straps that you can place on the bottom of your shoes, like the Earthy straps, or even, sandals, for example, that have grounding plugs built into them, like the Earth Runners. And of course, you can just go outside barefoot. You can walk on the beach. You can get in the salt water of the ocean, etc. But I'm typically doing some form of grounding or earthing, either the free outside version or using some sort of hack like a mat or a PMF device on almost a daily basis. And it's really interesting because when you look at it's called like the Rouleau effect, the red blood cell clumping that you can see on like a live red blood cell analysis. I mean, you see immediate reversal of clumping of cells in response to earthing, grounding, and PMF, which is going to result in a less anaerobic state and more oxygen delivery to tissues. And again, when we're looking at this, from a time-sensitive standpoint, at the time we're recording this, in the wake of the coronavirus and everything, we know that viruses will thrive in an anaerobic environment. And so, anything you can do to increase oxygen delivery to cells, that would include like hyperbaric oxygen, ozone therapy, et cetera. I think it's a smart move, and earthing and grounding may have an indirect effect on that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I'm glad you actually hit the earthing thing, because it is. Anyone can do it, and it's a big deal, especially in today's day and age. Here's another one. This is cheap, easy, and you talk a lot about it in your book, cryotherapy, right? I mean, this is something you love, man. I mean, you're the king of cryo, so talk about it.
Yeah, some people will say, and there's some media out there about this, how you got to be careful with ice baths and cryo because it will like blunt the hormetic response to exercise by excessively shutting down inflammation. And the problem is that argument is based on studies that show a decrease of close to 10 degrees Fahrenheit in muscle tissue, which would be induced by 10 plus minutes in a pretty cold ice bath and long periods of cold exposure. Brief intermittent bouts of cold for recovery, for the nitric oxide effect, for the induction of some of these cold shock and heat shock proteins, for the suppression of the mammalian dive reflex and the impact on the vagus nerve. There's a host of positive functions to cold exposure, but the trick is that your inflammation, in terms of the inflammation that's going to induce things like satellite cell proliferation and mitochondrial biogenesis in response to exercise, that peaks in about the 1 hour window following exercise. So arguably, if you were going to take antioxidants or you were going to do a cold exposure, that would naturally, even if it's not 10 plus minutes, may have a mild blunting effect of that inflammatory response. Just do it at least an hour after an exercise session, and preferably just like later in the day, like it's wonderful for cooling the body at night before you go to bed anyway. So that's a good time to do it. And a lot of times at the Greenfield house, we're finishing up the day with some sauna, some breath work, and a quick, 2 to 5 minutes in the cold pool. But, when you look at these, am I still there? My video disappeared for a second.
Yeah.
There we go. So if you look at like a cryotherapy chamber, 3.5 minutes in a cryotherapy chamber, the muscle temperature drops about 1.5 degrees. Again, nowhere near what you need to cause like a blunting of a muscle gain response or a mitochondrial response or anything like that. So yeah, I'm a fan of cold. If you really truly want to play it safe, just don't do the cold right after an exercise session. Save it for about 1 to 2 hours after an exercise session.
Great advice.
And even then, if you're working out within 3 hours before you go to bed, we know that impacts core temperature in terms of increasing it to the extent that will deleteriously impact sleep.
Yeah.
So even then, I'd say, you're not going to see a big blunting by doing a quick cold shower after an evening workout. So, I mean, I'm not opposed to just throwing it in right after the workout. But again, just avoid excessive, like shivering response, 10 plus minutes of cold exposure, and you'll be fine.
Last topic, and it's something I've never discussed on this show, but I've had questions about, right? You mentioned them already. It's peptides. Peptides right now, it's kind of a craze, right? So first of all, explain to people what are peptides, and then explain how they could use it. You were actually the one who introduced me to peptides originally. And it was, even BPC 157, right? Which is a recovery peptide. You were one of the first to talk about it. And, you brought that into my world. So talk about these types of peptides. And there's many peptides, by the way, brain peptides, growth hormone peptides, and of course, recovery peptides.
Yeah, they're just, amino acid sequences. Generally, they're made via an amino acid sequence generator, which is really the best way to make them in a lab, or they're grown on like an E. coli-based medium, which is generally the less expensive peptides are a little bit less pure. And so I always recommend going through a doctor, like going to the website for the International Peptide Society, like I mentioned, and hooking up with a good doc, or, there's a really good physician practitioner network I refer out to a lot called the Wild Health Network, wildhealthmd.com, I think. And most of their practitioners are pretty well versed in peptide therapy as well. But, what we're talking about is when we generate an amino acid sequence, you can create compounds that target cell receptors in very, very specific manners. Like if you take growth hormone, right, like a popular anabolic compound used by bodybuilders and the athletic community often, and also in the anti-aging community, growth hormone is not going to selectively target growth hormone receptors on specific cells. It's going to act on brain tissue, muscle tissue, liver tissue, et cetera, which is why it may be mildly carcinogenic if you overuse something like growth hormone. But when you look at a growth hormone peptide like tesamorelin, for example, that's going to primarily interact with muscle and fat cell receptors, and that would be one that works really well, cycled like 5 days on, 2 days off for muscle gain and fat loss. Another example that you brought up, BPC 157, body protection compound 157. It's something that shuts down gastric inflammation, which is why the body.
It's one that it works. I mean, if you have an injury, if you want to recover, it does. It works. Amazing
for inflammation. I actually have a couple of bottles of that. I just re-upped my stock just because, I know if I contract coronavirus, that cytokine storm that's produced in response to that is something that can be managed with anti-inflammatory approaches, such as the use of something like BPC 157. So it's good for recovery. It's also good for inflammation. There's one that's often co-administered with BPC 157 called TV 500, thymosin beta 500. Really great for repairing fibers and things like Achilles tendonitis, soft tissue injuries in the knee, shoulder, etc. So that TV 500, BPC 157 is a good stack. When we were talking about nootropics and smart drugs, that dihexa CMAX stack that I talked about, that's a peptide stack. And then We talked about tesamorelin as like a muscle gain, fat loss peptide. And there's even one for sleep. You know, there are literally dozens and dozens. There's one for sleep called deep sleep inducing peptide.
Yeah.
A lot of people think because it's called DSIP, deep sleep inducing peptide, you're supposed to take it right before bed. The proper timing for that, actually, based on most of the research on circadian rhythmicity, is you actually take that in the morning, or at least you take it 3 to 4 hours prior to bed. But that's another one that's useful. The one thing is a lot of these peptides can have a little bit of a tachyphylactic response, meaning you kind of get used to them. So cycling is good, like tesamorelin, 5 days on, 2 days off. You know, BPC 157 and TV 500 are used only when you need that enhanced recovery. Deep sleep inducing peptide only when you really need to like crush a super solid night of sleep. And so you don't want to overuse peptides, but I mean, I've got an anti-aging chapter in the book. This book was originally just going to be a book on anti-aging and longevity, and kind of morphed. But, you know, the anti-aging chapter is like 150 pages long. And I talk about a bunch of other kind of Russian-based peptides, from epitalon to humanin to MOTC, that are fantastic for mitochondrial proliferation, reduced all-cause risk of mortality, even injected in brief cycles throughout the year, like 10-day cycles a couple of times a year. So there's some pretty compelling peptides out there, and I really think that we're just going to see more and more use of peptides, and not just the field of anti-aging, but also, you know, recovery, cognitive enhancement, anti-inflammation, nerve regrowth, erythropoietin production. There's just a lot of cool peptides out there right now.
I'm a fan of peptides. They actually work. So again, Boundless, you can read more about these peptides that I've used, Ben has used, obviously, for recovery, but just like you said, for sleep and these other things you may not think about beyond just recovery. But yeah, Ben, so I appreciate you, man. I know you're on a time schedule always, but I appreciate it. You're the king of the biohacks, bro. And your book reflects it. It is the Encyclopedia Britannica of, I would say, anti-aging, recovery, all of it. I love it. Look at this thing, man. This is just a wealth of knowledge in here. So we appreciate you bringing it, man. We do. It's great.
Yeah, well, hopefully some people pick it up and benefit from it. There's a Kindle version. There's an audio version.
Yeah.
I think the physical version's cool just because it's like a coffee table kind of book. But anybody who wants it, it's out there, and hopefully people find it helpful.
You know, I have to pay you a compliment because my son, right? He's my son Daniel. He's down into everybody doing everything. He knows my work very well, and you know, he says, you know, Dad, in your field, it's like, man, you just don't take what someone says for granted. You dig deep. You really research it. He's like, I feel like Ben is that in the fitness world. You know, it's like he just digs deep. You know, he just doesn't say things that other people say. So that's a great compliment from my son, Daniel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. That's awesome.
Absolutely. All right, Ben, I love you, man. I love your family and everything you do, man. And you're a wealth of knowledge in these areas. So I appreciate it that I could bring you on. Some of these questions that I've been, you know, people have been asking, and I just never brought the experts. So you bring a real balanced view of everything, Ben. Thank you.
All right. Well, it's my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on. And those of you who are listening in, look out on my show. I'm going to be featuring Dan pretty soon, and we're going to have another discussion. So stay tuned for a part 2 on my show.
Absolutely. Get Boundless and follow Ben on his social media. He's the best, man. He dials into it all. So thanks, Ben. Love you.
All right. Later, Dan.
Yeah.